So I'm going to try and do something that feels really tricky because it's so incredibly layered. But I'm going to just attempt to describe the profile of, I'm just going to call them narcissists. I just wanted to try to describe this type of man. Obviously, there are women out there who are narcissistic and psychopathic as well. I feel like from videos that I've watched and women that I've met in my life, women tend to express those qualities in a different way than men. I'm sure there's a lot of different reasons for that, but I'm just going to be talking about men because most of my romantic experiences have been men. Hi, it's me from the future who forgot to say stuff in the past. Yeah, so like my intro for this video kind of sucked. What I'm basically trying to say is I made this video attempting to show some similarities in the profiles that I saw from all the different men that I dated who were either psychopathic, narcissistic, I don't know, call them whatever you want, but from all the many different like men that I've been involved with who had sort of manipulative, predatory, sex addict-y personalities, I over the years have come to find that there are a lot of similarities in just really random things about their personalities, some of which I've found talked about in other videos. Some of which I haven't seen talked about in other videos, and I just find kind of like interesting myself that they constantly are like popping up. So this video is just this random idea I had to make a video about those similarities that I have seen, in case maybe you've seen them too. One of the first things that I would say that I notice about these men, looking back on them, a similar factor with all of them is they all had very tumultuous relationships with their mothers growing up. The first man that I became involved with, well, my predator that groomed me when I was 13, his mother was an alcoholic. She invited men over frequently who my predator claims molested him as a child. So there was sexual abuse in his childhood. And his mother just wasn't a emotionally present person and had her own abusive tendencies. The second man that I was involved with, his mother was schizophrenic, and oftentimes he told me that she locked him in a closet sometimes as a child because she thought that people were coming to get him, thought that the apartment was on fire. He moved out and got away from her when he was 15 years old and sort of became this person who lived on the road, a vagabond of sorts, a person just who didn't really stay with one person. He just traveled around a lot starting at 15 just to get away from her. And he told me stories of stealing cars with his friends, doing a lot of drugs, doing a lot of hallucinogenics, but that lifestyle started at 15, and he had a very chaotic childhood with his mother before that. Still had a lot of resentment for her as well. The next man that I was involved with, his mother also suffered from alcoholism, and he was placed in foster care at a very young age with his other siblings, and told me that he again had a lot of resentment towards his mother, tried to run away from his foster care parents who were also abusive. He experienced molestation at the hands of some of the other foster boys that lived with him when he was a child, and constantly was trying to get back to his parents and back to his mom, and his mom constantly sent him back to his foster parents, said she didn't want him. And then another man that I was involved with, his mother again was an alcoholic. He had a lot of resentment towards her. She was not present at all in his childhood, and he ended up, because it was so bad, again, these are all stories from them. I don't know how much is true and how much isn't true, but reported that he ended up living with his dad instead, and also felt very neglected and experienced a lot of apathy at the hands of his father. His father ended up remarrying when he was a teenager, and this man purported that his dad just essentially started a new life with that next woman, had kids with her, and sort of just left him and his siblings in the dust. And so he just felt sort of abandoned by both parents. I know with the second man that I was involved with, he didn't really know his dad very well until later in life. But all of them, regardless of the father, had consistent, I would almost call them traumatic relationships with their mothers growing up. And I saw that resentment. They all still had very intense resentments towards their mothers. And I saw that play into what I felt like play into their history of relationships with women that they also opened up to me about, because I'd asked them about their past girlfriends and past marriages if they'd had them. And I saw that resentment that they had towards their mother. It seemed like they had that level of resentment, that intense level of resentment towards other women as well. It obviously wasn't for the same reasons, but either way, that resentment carried over. The next common trait that I noticed in all of them when I look back on them in hindsight is the ability for all of them to carry secret resentments well. And so what I mean by a secret resentment is, all of them would open up to me about these resentments that they had towards the people around them, but all of the people that they had resentments towards seemed unaware of the resentments. And I would even explicitly ask them sometimes if they had talked to their friends or their family members about these resentments. And they would either say that yes, they had, and nothing really came of it or whatever, or they'd say, no, I'm not going to talk to the person about that. But looking back in hindsight, I don't think they ever did really talk to the people about those resentments. And I think it's because they had, and I saw this in one of the other videos that I posted about experts talking about sex addiction. They actually did clarify this a bit, that they tend to, the sex addict, for example, tends to build a case in their mind against a person, almost so that they have an excuse for the inappropriate behavior that they engage in later. And I did see that with these men, where it was almost like they had not just a case built against their past partners, which made them feel like they had an excuse for cheating or any inappropriate behavior that they had towards them, but it was almost like they had a secret case of resentment built against everyone in their life, so that they almost didn't feel a sense of remorse for anything that they did towards anyone. And so I think one reason that they never fully talked out these resentments that they had with the people that they felt them towards was because if they did that, then there would be a resolution to the resentment, and then they wouldn't have an excuse or a justification for their hurtful, vindictive, inappropriate lack of loyalty that they had towards the people around them. I think a lot of times that is what they used it for, was just to have a lack of loyalty, whatever that happened to look like, whether that was just really gossiping about the people around them in a very two-faced way, or not needing to help them in a way that their friend might need help with. Whatever the case may be, they had an excuse for their abusive level of selfishness that they existed in, is how I would almost summarize that. Me again. One thing I didn't tie into this part was, when I talked earlier about their relationships with their mothers that were very traumatic oftentimes, and then this ability also that I saw for them to hold secret resentments well. I don't know if this is true, but sometimes I wondered if the reason that they held secret resentment so much with people, but especially with the women that they dated, I wondered if it was almost because in their relationships with their mothers or their caregivers early on, they maybe as children attempted to open up about the things that were hurting them, and saw that the caregiver or the mother was not a safe person to open up to about their hurt feelings. And so maybe as children, they learned to internalize it instead and process that resentment or that upset emotion by themselves instead. And then I almost wondered if that carried on later in life into how they have resentments and relationships with women, mirroring again that relationship they had with their mom or caregiver, where the person was not safe to open up to, the person didn't try to understand their feelings. And so later in life, it was almost like they assumed that the person wouldn't care, but also had developed a secret lifestyle for how they coped with their feelings in terms of sex addiction, drug addiction, whatever that might be, where they didn't want to give up that secret lifestyle. So it's like the two sort of bled together in the end, but I did wonder if the way that they held secret resentments initiated from the mom not being a safe person to open up to, and then they developed this habit of sort of building a case for their life and forming assumptions about their life on their own and not trusting other people's perceptions. So one difference that I saw where there was a distinct difference and yet still similarities is the second man that I was involved with, he had what I would almost say he had no baseline personality. And again, you don't really see these things until you're involved in an intimate relationship with these people. You really have to exist with them on a day-to-day basis to see these more subtle nuances of the inconsistencies in their stories, the inconsistencies in their personalities, whatever the inconsistencies are. I mean, that's true for all of us in anything, right? But so with this man, it wasn't honestly until I'd been involved with him for about 6 months or so that I really started seeing how he had no baseline personality. And so what this looked like was sometimes in front of certain people, I actually thought that he was gay when I first met him from how he displayed himself in front of me. And then as he became interested in dating me, that personality faded away and he actually started mirroring and mimicking my personality more. And I didn't realize until later in hindsight that, I always said that he felt like a soulmate to me. I couldn't understand why I felt this like intense connection like I'd always known him. Looking back now, I see that it's because he mirrored my personality. And so that familiarity that I felt, that feeling of always feeling like I'd always known him, it was because he was mirroring me back to myself. And so that was what felt familiar to me, was the similarities of my own personality that I was seeing and experiencing in him and through him. And then as I continued to be involved with him, I saw him do this with other people, not just in his mannerisms. His voice would change. If a man called him, his voice would deepen significantly. If it was someone who was maybe a more hyper-masculine business partner or client of some kind. And then if he was around like really young girls, I saw him have that more effeminate personality that caused the young girls to open up to him more. And so I just saw this, but I also saw his opinions change. So when he was with me, he would display and express certain opinions that made me, again, feel like we were soulmates, feel like there was that familiarity, that in-syncness that kept me very tied to him emotionally. And then when he was around other people, the more that I hung out with him, the more that I saw that he expressed opinions more similar to them, where I would almost argue with him later sometimes about it and say, okay, I heard you say such and such to so-and-so, but when we hung out the other day, you told me blah, blah, blah. And he would either gaslight me and make me feel like I was crazy and like I'd misheard him, either with that person or with what I heard him say to me the other day, or he would twist the conversation and distract me by taking it a completely different direction so that the fight turned into something else instead. But either way, those differences of opinions were never fully resolved. I was just attacked for noticing those differences. But those differences did exist. And after being involved with him for almost 3 years, that just continued to become worse and worse. I saw that more and more. And after I ended that relationship with him, I was left feeling like I never really knew who he was as a person. Like there was never a baseline personality. There was never any consistency to him whatsoever. He just always was whatever was in front of him. that was different than, so that felt very psychopathic to me in a lot of ways. I don't know if that's the correct label, but with these other men that seemed to have more narcissistic tendencies, while they weren't that extreme, like they did have baseline personalities in my opinion, I still did see aspects of that mirroring behavior, where while they had a baseline personality, there was a mirroring of opinions, a mirroring of maybe social behavior. So like maybe in front of me, they knew that I didn't really gossip, I didn't really like cattiness, I expected loyalty, I expected certain things and what I was looking for in a partner. So when they were in front of me, they would act that way to please me and to keep me involved with them because they were hoping to get sex. Is really, anyway, that's the next thing and I won't. But so while they did that with me, they displayed other behavior in front of other people. And so the only difference I see with that is, whereas with this man, I felt like there really was no baseline personality, with these other people, it was more so that they did have a baseline personality, but that baseline personality was more so kept for them, for themselves. While it felt like the first man mirrored because there was nothing else for him to draw out of, the second group of people, it seemed like they more so mirrored out of a sense of protecting and hiding that baseline personality. Like they knew that the baseline, they felt that the baseline personality that they had was inappropriate in some form or another. And so they would only really reveal that personality to certain people, aspects of it or the entire thing. But if it needed to be hidden in order to achieve some other sort of thing that they were trying to get, then they would modify their personality so that it seemed more appropriate to whoever was in front of them, if that makes sense. The next thing that I saw that was very consistent with a lot of them was what I would almost describe as this fluctuation between truth and lying, that they had no desire to monitor or be aware of. So it was almost like this compulsive lying that bled so much into their everyday behavior that to this day, I still have no idea what was real and what was a lie with every single one of these men. And the things that they lied about, some of them were so unnecessary that I think that shows the compulsiveness and the lack of forethought that came into it at times. You know, when I've talked with some women who are trying to process the lying aspect of the relationship, a lot of times, you know, I've told them that it's not always like there was an insidious reason that, like, they sat down and they concocted this lie and the lie was very well thought out and intricate. Like, there's not always that level of neuroticness going on with the lie that they told. Sometimes there was just a laziness that was there. Sometimes the way that it was abusive is the fact that they literally cared so little about you and about the conversation that the lie was was born out of the amount of apathy that existed. The lack of caring about the conversation is why they lied. So, you know, sometimes when people are watching these videos on these certain types of abusive people, they're like, well, I don't think someone sits around and like tries to insidiously lie that much about everything. And I'm like, no, that's the point. Like, it's not always. That requires energy, that requires caring, that requires investment. And so while they can lie in that kind of way, with that kind of energy, with that kind of investment, usually that is because they're going to, it's to receive some type of reward. That's when that type of lying occurs, you know, and whether the reward is they're lying to you to get sex out of you, they're lying to you to get something monetary or a physical asset of some kind out of you, or whether it's because they enjoy drama and they feed off of that kind of negative energy, that's still a reward for them. Those are all rewards. But so that's one type of lying. And then there's this other type of lying that I became very aware of in these relationships, where when they weren't going to be achieving some kind of reward in the situation with me, if no reward was existing, they were literally just lying because they'd swung the other way, and they were completely apathetic, they were bored, they were uninterested in the conversation. And sometimes they would lie literally just so that the conversation would end. They would lie so that I would shut up and stop asking questions. They would lie just so that we could move on to another topic. You know, so there were different types of lying that occurred, but either way, there was so much lying that occurred that, you know, why they chose to be honest with me in certain moments and why they chose to lie in other moments, I'll never fully understand. But I do see that if they were ever honest with me, it was never because, in my opinion, this is just how I've chosen to process it, they weren't honest for my sake. They were never honest for my sake. If they were ever honest with me, it was because it benefited them in some kind of way that was unknown to me, and will maybe be forever unknown to me. But they never were honest on my behalf. Everything that they ever did, whether it was a lie or honesty, was only ever to achieve some sort of selfish reward for their own sake, period. And what I also just touched on something which was another consistent thing that I saw in all of their personalities, but it took me a really long time to catch on to, which is that they all of them derived joy and pleasure from strife, from drama, from me being unhappy. And so what I've realized this comes from, what the motivator for this is, where that joy and pleasure comes from, is the fact that if you really think about it, you know, when you're involved with someone that you care about, and for them, I don't believe they cared about me in the same way that I cared about them, but either way, they were emotionally invested in me in some kind of way, right? Even if it was just as an object to receive sexual pleasure from, they're still somewhat emotionally invested in that. So when we are emotionally invested in someone, if we have no ability to make them upset or jealous or feel anything, if we never affect their mood whatsoever, I think it could be a fair argument that that person might not care about us that much, right? That's one way that I think that we gauge how much someone is invested in us, how much we are invested in each other, is that our mood can be affected by that person, that they care enough about us that their mood changes based on our behavior. They are invested in our behavior, and our behavior can affect their mood. And so in that vein, for different reasons, when we take how we feel with that and go over here to what's going on with these men that I dated, or people like this in general in the world, they feel a sense of power when they can see that they affect our mood. So whereas with us, you know, we're using this to almost kind of measure how much love exists in the situation, how much emotional connection exists in the situation, to hopefully measure and affirm for ourselves that there is love, that there is an emotional connection. That's what we're using that for. They are using that as a barometer to see how much power and control they have over us. This was the consistent thing that I saw with the men that I dated, and this was the consistent motivator that I saw with the men that I dated, was that they enjoyed seeing that they upset me. They truly seemed to derive pleasure from that, and I do believe it was because it gave them a sense of power and control over me, seeing that they could affect my mood. And the thing that made it tricky for me to catch on to this was because they always acted in the moment like the drama was so inconvenient, like I was really burdening them, like I was really ruining their day, right? I just put in a real damper. Like one thing that one of the men I dated said all the time was, we could be having a really nice moment right now if you weren't doing this and bringing this thing up again. Here's how I know that they didn't actually feel that uncomfortable with the drama, and it didn't actually bother them that much. The way that I knew that is because the behavior that they did that resulted in drama occurring, drama meaning me being upset, me trying to talk it out with them to find a resolution, they would exhibit that, they would go back and do that behavior again. And it was sometimes very subtle and it was sometimes very overt. But either way, with all of these men were incredibly intelligent, paid attention to detail, really noticed people's micro behaviors around them. I mean, they are social engineering masters, if you want to summarize them in one kind of way. Truly, they are master social manipulators. And if you're really good at manipulating people, one thing you have to be able to do in order to manipulate people is pay attention to what upsets them, what makes them happy. You know, when they want to avoid drama, when they want to love bomb us, when they want to create a super happy, lovey-dovey Disneyland-like experience for us in the beginning of the relationship, these people know how to avoid drama and conflict because they are watching and observing and seeing what upsets us. And they avoid all of those things in the beginning stages so that we stay very happy, so that the entrapment occurs, right? And so if you look at that, if you look at how good they were at avoiding the drama in the early stages, they could still use that skill and do that for you later in the relationship. That shows that that skill exists. That shows that that awareness exists. That shows that that ability for them to modify their behavior and change their behavior to make us happy exists. They can do that. They have that tool in their toolbox. So the question becomes, why are they not picking that tool up and why are they not utilizing that skill? When we have, especially for me, when I had explicitly expressed to them, when you do this thing, it makes me upset. When you do this thing, it makes me feel crazy. When you do this thing, it makes me doubt myself, blah, blah, blah. Like, we lay out for them very clearly the things that make us feel insecure and unhappy. And instead of working very hard, you know, with their words, they will say that they've worked very hard to avoid making us unhappy and they're so sorry that this happened again. And yet if you really examine their behavior, there is an incredible lack of effort going on. And that's really the dichotomy that exists that leaves people feeling very confused because they don't know which one to trust, the words or the behavior. But if you really just examine the behavior, especially the behavior in the honeymoon stage versus the behavior later in the relationship where there is an incredible amount of apathy occurring, I think that points to it the most. Another aspect that is kind of more subtle, but I noticed with several of these guys, I feel like it would fall more in the psychopathic column of qualities. But with several of these men, I saw so there's a clinical term under psychopathy called fearless dominance. And that's where psychopaths sometimes, in order to feel the sensation of dominance, have almost like a fearlessness in what they're willing to do to achieve that sensation for themselves. I think that's pretty much how I would summarize that. Correct me if I'm wrong. But I almost saw this sense of fearless dominance exhibited with these men over themselves. And what I mean by that is, like, for example, their relationship that they had with their bodies and their relationship that they have with their bodies with drugs and alcohol and being hungover and things of that nature. It was really interesting to see how sometimes it almost appeared like they were trying to see how much control they could exert over the desires of their body, the functions of their body, just really pushing their own bodies to a limit that maybe our bodies wouldn't be able to handle, seeing if they can push their bodies to that limit, being able to push their bodies to that limit, just having this really kind of dominant relationship with their own body and their own human nature, their own human needs, and being successful in that. Drugs not being able to affect them or control them, alcohol and the sensation of being hungover not being able to affect or control them. So like one man, for example, that I was involved with, he was incredibly hungover one morning and he still went ahead and ran a marathon, an incredibly long marathon. And I just remember thinking how that would have been impossible for me. I know there was another man where, in a different way, he engaged in hallucinogenics when he was younger, and then he started to abstain from them, but he continued to be around people who did engage in hallucinogenics and drugs. And he would find people to have sex with at parties where he was completely sober, but the other people were inebriated. One, this is obviously exploitive in nature, but two, I just saw him attempting to have a sense of control in the situation in his sobriety, also engaging in alcohol and drugs, and then continuing to go to work. While with some people this would be because there's an addiction issue going on, with several of these men, it almost seemed like they were not immune to addiction, but their relationship with drugs just seemed to have a different nature, where it almost seemed like they were trying to assert dominance over the drug, over the alcohol, to see if they could control the drug's effect on them, control how much alcohol they could consume while still being successful in whatever it was they were doing, whether that was going to work, running a marathon like I listed earlier, just sort of pushing themselves to some kind of physical limit, and successfully. Another thing, which maybe sounds random but was a pattern that I noticed with all of them, is that they were very good at chess. When I say they were good at chess, there was one man more recently who I was involved with where it actually creeped me out how good he was at chess, because if you've played chess, you know it's a game of war, but you have to be very aware of all of the possible moves involved. And with all of these men, they were very good at thinking 5 steps ahead. And that really showed in their chess game technique. They were making it up as they went, and they were just always aware of all of the possible moves around them. They were good at picking that up quickly, seeing it, and always being 5 steps ahead of me. And the reason why it creeped me out with the last man, or the more recent man that I was involved with, was because it showed how well he was at doing that in life in general. The other part of this that I didn't really specify well about the chess was, one, all of these guys loved chess. So, and that's lots of people, right? But I just found that really interesting that every single one of these guys loved chess. And when I say they loved chess, I mean they either had an app on their phone that they played in their free time where they were trying to win against a computer, or they had actually studied how to be successful in chess, and they were like semi-professional players, not even necessarily a part of a club, but they had like taken the time to really perfect the art of chess. So I just found that interesting. But also the way that they enjoyed chess, what I saw with all of them is, one, I think men enjoy just being good at things that are highly specialized. That's just like, people can just enjoy that, right? But the part that I saw with them was there almost seemed to be a way that they enjoyed chess because, again, talking about that fearless dominance that some of these people like feeling, I feel like because chess is the art of war, that's what it was created from. It's mimicking war in some ways, psychological warfare, and warlike tactics through game pieces. I found that they all really seem to feel a sense of satisfaction from dominating people psychologically in that complex kind of way, where chess really does imitate, I think, the art of psychological warfare and warfare in general in life. Chess imitates that very well. And so when you win at chess, especially if you've been successfully predatory in the game, I mean, if you've really been able to think 5 steps ahead of the other person the entire time, I think it mirrors that predatory experience that they have in life in general, and gives them the same feeling of predatory success through chess as well. That's just my theory, but that is kind of a sense that I got from them when they won, and from how well studied they were, and the way that they tried to play with me by being 5 steps ahead of me the whole game. It was almost like they were practicing this predatory habit, this way of being dominant and thinking ahead of another person. It's like they were practicing that skill through chess. I saw this also play out in their real life behavior as well, because in how they formed relationships with people. I know one man that I was involved with, there was a neighbor that he had who had a rather large plot of land. And this older man had made it very clear to people that he was not interested in selling it to anyone. Well, the man that I was involved with had been slowly building a relationship with this older man when I met him for several years. So he was already several years into really getting to know this man, offered to help mow his lawn free of charge, just out of the kindness of his heart. And then he mentioned, and I always thought he was very kind for doing it. I remember telling him, like, wow, it's so amazing that you're helping him out and just mowing his land for him. That's so kind. And then he mentioned to me one day, yeah, his plot of land's right next to mine, and he's made it clear that he doesn't intend on selling it to anyone in the neighborhood. And he didn't, and I said, wait, are you hoping that eventually he might sell it to you? And he was like, well, I don't know, maybe. And said it like very casually, but I almost knew in that moment that that was why he was doing those favors for him. He had never let that older man know that he had any interest whatsoever in purchasing his land. But secretly, in the back of his mind, he was playing the long game. And he was 5 steps ahead. And he basically had assessed this person and realized, you know what, in order to get the land, it would at least work to my benefit to have a higher chance of him maybe selling it to me if I just build a relationship with him. Like I've talked in other videos before, you know, the best way to get something from someone isn't to be aggressive, isn't to be scary, isn't to make them want to get away from you because you seem so psycho and insane. The best way to get something from someone is to pretend to be their friend, pretend to be in love with them, build that relationship. And relationships don't form overnight, guys. Loyalty doesn't form overnight, and they enjoy the challenge. And part of that challenge is building long-term relationships sometimes, so that they have the patience to wait for the thing that they want. And so the chess game and the way that they interact in real life, they are always 5 steps ahead of everyone. And one of the last things I wanted to say, and what I've noticed, that was my go, about people, the men that I've been involved with, is the easiest way to summarize and understand them. Obviously, it's a very oversimplified way of describing it, but if you really want to water down all of the behavior and the structure of their personality that I've noticed, it's very easy to understand them when comparing them to a toddler or a very young child. And I don't say that to be mean or to demean them in any kind of way. It just is very true. If you look at the selfishness that a very young child has, their inability to really share very well, the possessiveness that they have over the things that they feel are theirs, their lack of ability to care and how their actions affect other people, if that other person's actions got in the way of them getting something that it was that they wanted, maybe not feeling bad for pushing another child down, struggling to understand why that's a bad thing when they just wanted to get the toy that they wanted to get. I mean, it being literally that basic, you can really see all of those components in these adult children that I have dated, at least. You see all of those really emotionally regressed types of motivators in them, at least for me, and what I've seen in the men that I've dated. That was absolutely how I would almost water down their behavior. Just motivation to care it, if so they metaphorically push someone aside to get the thing that it is that they wanted, really only being able to care about their own needs and feeling justified in any behavior that they have that helped them get the thing that it is that they wanted, because they feel like that is truly the most important thing, and the way that they can't almost understand that their behavior is wrong, just like a child, a very, very young child can't. And so, you know, if you're ever feeling like it's really hard to understand people like this, I look at those children, and I look at the adult children that I've met, and I think to myself, you know, you had all of these very limited tools of manipulation when you were a child, and instead of evolving out of them and finding other ways to connect and care for the people around you, you stayed emotionally regressed, and with the very few limited manipulative tools that you had as a child, you took those tools and just became very, 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 very good at using them. And so that is one reason why they are almost more intelligent in manipulation than we are, because instead of having 10 different tools in their toolbox to use to connect to other people like we do, and maybe not being as well versed in the ones that we had when we were children, they still only really have those original tools, and they've refined them and know how to use them very, very, very well.